If you could speak to us about what your intentions are about carrying on that great work, even as Measure Y is threatened, and as the city has just received another $3 million earmark from the feds, what would you utilize that money to do, and how would you strengthen the improvements that we've been able to make in violence prevention programming in the city of Oakland?
Again, I think the dust up, I mean, the last thing Oakland needed to do is tell the world that we're going to have fewer cops. I mean, I don't care where you live, it's just a bad idea. There has been a remarkable uptick now in daytime burglaries, armed robberies, in areas where they're not accustomed to having those things, so maybe that's going to give people be a little bit more chastening. I believe that we hired Tony Batts to be our new chief to manage a very badly managed department. He has been here a year. He has a strategic plan. That has been suppressed for 4 months because they didn't want it to come out, I guess, and influence God knows what, probably crime. But Tony, Tony's got a 3-year contract, and I would see him through on that contract. I haven't seen all of his strategic plan, but I do know that the backside of what he's talking about is the prevention side that you're talking about. So assuming that I'm correct in identifying the funds to restore the 80 officers, and assume that Tony is going to be able to reduce his operating costs by civilianizing certain things, by bringing technology into the police department, not cameras necessarily in their cars, but technology that helps expedite the edges of crime prevention and enforcement, then our attention should be turning to the prevention side. And if Measure Y and its components have become the prototype, then we ought to build on that, not try to do something different. Let's take what works and support it further. In the areas where there are gaps, or we identified where there are gaps, let's fill them. In areas where programs are struggling because they simply can't hit the pitching yet, let's give them coaches to teach them how to hit. So I think the emphasis has to be on prevention, and we can still do that by making a core priority the cops on the street. There's no substitute for having a police presence that's adequate to the need. But you hire professional people to do that. For too long, the council has, they've decided what the priorities for policing ought to be in their district. And that flat just doesn't, that doesn't work. That's what you want your chief to do. But it seems to me that the only way we can get where we need to go in violence, that whole area of suppression is very, very difficult. You have to do it with a plethora of support from community groups and young people that are teaching young people.
So you've got a new strategic plan by the police department. You've got a new strategic plan by the school district, and they are all saying the right thing. But you also said that a lot of times the strategic plans are a whole lot of poppycock.
Yep.
How do you see yourself as mayor coordinating those efforts and aligning the dollars?
I look at, Oakland, we've got the Tony over there, Tony Batts, and then we've got the other Tony over there. And we also have somebody named Pete Sarna, who is the chief of police for the Oakland schools. Pete is a hell of a cop. And he is the basis upon which I think we can begin to do that kind of coordination. Pete has been talking about this since I've known him for 25 years. He's been talking about it for 25 years. He's now in a command position to be able to do that. So I would like to see that as part of Tony Batts' command structure, I would like to see Sarna be in that top administration, so he has a worldview of policing from OPD's point of view, and they have a worldview of his. And then I'm fairly confident that we can see things beginning to, on that level, being coordinated. And if we're coordinating our other programs, our prevention programs, through the county and through the city, then I think we've got both ends at least talking to each other and saying, okay, these should be our priorities. I would love to know what get in a room of people, people from Youth Uprising, Evasi, and a few others. Get everybody in a room with Tony Batts and Pete Sarna and talk about, okay, what would be the next 4 months' priorities? If we're going to do things the same or different, what would it be? I'd love to see that kind of a conversation, and then I'd like to see somebody act on it.
Right. I'm curious to know how you restore the public's trust and confidence, because the thing that the city has done is it has not followed through on its commitments and its promises. And so while I hear full well the need to fund through these tax sources, right, as our funding strategies, how do you realistically do that and get the public to come along with you when we have not followed through? And it can't be with these Band-Aid or these rubber stamp oversight committees that are not empowered to hold both the providers and the city accountable to do the things that they say they're going to do.
A good point. You can't hold providers accountable if you can't hold the city accountable. I completely agree. I think that's why Measure Y is going to go down in a flame, is because people have finally gotten to the point where they're saying, you know, you can't keep going into my pockets. I want to see some results. I think it begins by, you got to have a mayor that's going to show up. You got to be places. You know, when 4 police officers are murdered and it takes you 7 hours to get on the scene, that's scandalous. When a young kid is cut down, it's 15-year-old or 18-year-old cut down at a bus stop, that's where the mayor ought to be. We've got to let people know that somebody in City Hall is paying attention. That's what it is, not for a photo op. You got to go to a couple of funerals. Just be there. You don't have to bring the media with you. Be there. And once you start setting that tone, I believe that tone begins to permeate, because people recognize that if they don't get with the program, they're not going to have a job. We have 14 people being paid very well. Everybody wants to say what the cops are being paid. All of our top administrators are being paid a whole lot more than anybody else in this room. And if they don't want to go with the program, we'll get somebody else who will. But you got to set the tone. That's the mayor's job. And I think you can look across the bay. Gavin has made green his mantra, and he's gotten a lot of attention and done a lot of things, some symbolically, which is necessary, some real things in that area. I think ours has to be in the area that we're just talking about. Our needs are much greater on the youth side.
So how do you partner both with the city manager and the department heads, along with any cabinet level individuals that would be czars of these particular policy areas, especially around young people and violence, to actually do the things that you talked about doing?
I reject the idea that you don't, that the mayor of Oakland has no control over his cabinet. That's just, you know, Jerry was very interested in building, and he got a planning director that was going to do what he wanted to do. He backed her hand, pushed everybody else out of the way, and it got done. You may disagree with what he did, but he did do it. I'll hire the city administrator and the finance director and all the other 13 department heads. Now, you can judge for yourself whether you think I'll have a hard time persuading people to do what I think needs to get done. I mean, it just comes down to that. You know, you give somebody that 1,000-yard stare a couple times, and I'm meeting with them every morning. Every morning you're going to come into my office and sit down, and we're going to go around the room and say, what'd you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Then I'm going to drive around and see how they're doing. I'll pop in here and say, so what's going on in this area? I was told this by so-and-so. I mean, after a while, they'll be sitting up straight. And, you know, they don't even have goals and objectives right now, department heads. How do you evaluate somebody? They don't even know what they're doing. So we start lining that stuff up very quickly. It'll take a lot of time. Because, I mean, we got vacancies right now. We don't have a public works director. We don't have a fire chief. So we start doing those kinds of things, and they'll snap too. They will. There's no question and doubt in my mind. There is no excuse in this form of government that we have now. The mayor is the guy that's the buck stopper. And you go to him, and if he ain't getting it done, you ought to get rid of him.